Learning English has become synonymous with the coursebook.
Every year, tens of millions of English learners enroll in a new school year, and this usually entails a new glossy coursebook to commemorate the occasion. Additionally, millions more signing up for courses at private language schools around the world will be doing the same, buying a coursebook that promises to deliver them to a certain level of English by the end of the academic year.
Because that's how you learn something, right? You start on page 1, you read everything, you memorize it, and now you've learnt it. Then you move on to page 2 and, well, before you know it, you've finished the book and hey presto, you have just acquired a new language. But what if all of this is wrong?
What if the coursebook was actually demotivating, forcing learners to read sanitized, boring texts, to listen to fake asinine conversations, to regurgitate artificially simplified grammar rules, only to be left wondering,
is this what learning a language is all about? No. No, it's not. Let us first think about what a coursebook actually is.
A coursebook usually comes with a predetermined syllabus divided into modules. Each module may be focused on a particular situation or a particular topic, each with accompanying grammar and vocabulary that the student is to learn. These modules tend to be ordered in terms of difficulty, and what is considered difficult or easy is based on the personal feelings of the authors.
So a coursebook aimed at learners of English at a B1 preliminary level may start with the grammar of the present simple, and the topic that this is presented within could be daily routine. The goal of this module could be to ensure that students correctly place the S at the end of their third-person singular verbs. It could also be to ensure that students understand the subject-auxiliary verb inversion in interrogative forms, for example.
The lesson will likely begin with a text, either a reading exercise or something for them to listen to. This text will have been written explicitly for the coursebook, and of course, the text will be jam-packed with examples of the target grammar and vocabulary that the students are supposed to learn. The lucky students will next be greeted with the grammar rules. For example, do, does, plus the subject, plus the bare infinitive for interrogative forms in the present simple. Then the students may have to complete a series of grammar exercises in which students must manipulate sentences to create the desired forms. And finally, to close the lesson off, students will be given a space to practice the forms in a free exercise. This could be through writing or through speaking. Then the module ends.
Now students have learned the present simple. Next, they'll move on to the present continuous, and this will continue until all the grammar and vocabulary has been absorbed in the order with which it is presented in the textbook. Boy, this sounds great! In the world of English language teaching, this is known as PPP: present, practice, and produce. And if you have ever attended English language classes, then they've probably followed this format. This isn't necessarily because your teachers love using this format, but it will be because it's, generally speaking, the format that coursebooks follow. Intuitively, this makes a lot of sense. However, it is based on 3 very misguided assumptions. Assumption number 1. What is presented in the textbook is what is learned. Number 2, explicit knowledge about the language eventually transforms into implicit knowledge of how to use the language, and that the former is a prerequisite for the latter. And assumption 3, that language learning is linear, that we need to go through module 1 and then module 2 and then module 3, and all of this information will be sequentially absorbed. Let's look at each of these assumptions one by one.
Assumption 1. What is in the textbooks is what is learned.
Speak to any teacher of a foreign language and they will voice the same frustration. So for questions in the present simple, we have the question word, then we have do or does, our auxiliary verb. Then we've got the subject, and then finally we use our bare infinitive, okay? So then, what you do on the weekend? Anyone?
What do you do on the weekend?
Fantastic. You brush your teeth every day?
Yeah, I know this one. Do you brush your teeth every day? I don't think Duke does. He stinks. Ew.
Okay. Where he play? What goes here? Yeah.
Ow, that's easy. Where does he play?
You guys are doing a great job. You're learning so much English, all thanks to me. Oh, there's the bell. You gotta go. See you later.
Ow, Toby, where are we going now?
But this is not the fault of the students, because we do not and we cannot learn a language in the order that it is presented in a textbook. It's impossible. Instead, decades of research has demonstrated that language learning follows a developmental sequence, and this developmental sequence exists regardless of whether the grammar is presented in a certain order in a textbook. It exists regardless of when or how the teacher introduces a grammar topic.
For example, decades of research has shown that learners of English as a second language, both in a naturalistic setting and in a classroom setting, follow this developmental sequence when learning question formation. It does not matter what the learner does, or what their coursebook says, or what their teacher focuses on. This is the developmental sequence that question formation must take, and the same has been demonstrated with many other structures.
In short, a language learning syllabus isn't something that can exist in a coursebook or outside of the learner. It's actually something inside their own brains, and this has been dubbed the internal syllabus. And as a result, any attempts to artificially manipulate the learning process by breaking up the grammar into discrete chunks that should be learned sequentially is bound to fail. But sure, in the short term, repeatedly drilling placement of a third-person S when using the present simple may help a learner commit this rule to paper when doing grammar exercises. But this does not mean it has been integrated into the learner's conception of the language. It does not mean the language has been acquired. Instead, this is stored as explicit knowledge, which isn't readily available when using the language spontaneously. Does this mean that learners who learn a language through the use of a textbook will learn nothing? No, that's not what I'm saying. But it does mean that the language the learners will acquire from the textbook will not necessarily align with what the aims of that textbook are, unless the learner is developmentally ready for it. And the chances of this are low. And now imagine a class full of 10 students, 20 students, 30 students. The chances of all of them being developmentally ready for something presented in a course book is, well, it's minuscule. So you can imagine the mess that this creates.
Assumption 2. Explicit knowledge of the language translates into an ability to use the language.
First, we need to differentiate between explicit knowledge and implicit knowledge.
Rod Ellis has produced 7 criteria that distinguish these different types of knowledge from each other. But most importantly, explicit knowledge is conscious knowledge. It is knowledge that we are aware of having. It is knowledge that requires effort for us to access. Being able to explain the grammar structure of the second conditional is an example of explicit knowledge. Implicit knowledge, on the other hand, is intuitive. It is knowledge that we have, but cannot explain, and it is produced automatically. Being able to use the second conditional without knowing about the underlying grammar is an example of implicit knowledge.
Knowledge of our first language is largely implicit. This is what allows us to communicate spontaneously without searching for each word and putting our sentences together piece by piece. A course book is built on the assumption that eventually, with practice, what is learned explicitly will eventually become implicit. But unfortunately, we know that this is not how language learning works, at least not in the main.
When we are children, we are not taught grammar rules before being able to speak. Millions of people learn languages without any direct instruction at all. And if learning a language was just a matter of repeating what is taught, then a developmental sequence would not exist independent of what is taught.
This is not to say that nothing learned explicitly can become implicit knowledge, and researchers in general largely agree that some of what is learned explicitly can become implicit. However, the broad consensus is that the bulk of language learning occurs implicitly, and that this type of knowledge is the most durable. Yet course books are aiming to do the opposite. Course books generally focus on explicit knowledge of the language. This presents English similar to how history would be presented or a scientific subject would be presented, but no, language learning is different, and the bulk of what we learn linguistically is implicit, and the bulk of what we learn explicitly likely will never become implicit.
Assumption 3. Language learning is linear.
Imagine you are building a house. Each brick laid brings the house closer to completion. One brick after the other gradually leads to the end product, a complete house. And this process is entirely linear, unless someone comes and knocks the whole thing down. But no, in theory, this is a linear process. Now, a course book-led syllabus takes basically the same approach. You learn a little bit of language at a time, and eventually, fluency will emerge. But when it comes to language learning, this is not what happens. And evidence of progress in language learning isn't always the fact that a student gets questions right more often. Sometimes progress in language learning can be the complete opposite. Let me give you a quick example to show you what I mean. Learners are often very quickly able to learn common irregular past simple verbs. For example, that go in the past is went. And these learners will do a very good job for a short period of time of telling everyone how they went here and they went there. Boy oh boy, they went everywhere.
Oh my god, yeah, totally. First, I went to the gym, then I went to the restaurant, then I went to the cinema, then I went home, then I went to sleep. Yeah.
But then they will be introduced to regular past simple verbs. And with this newfound knowledge, learners will suddenly forget all about went and start saying goed.
Oh my gosh, babe, you will never guess what I did. First, I go to the restaurant, and then I go to the cinema, and then I go to the gym, and then I go home, and then I go to sleep. Yeah, crazy.
This may seem like a regression, but it's not. The learner's mental representation of the language in their head has gone through a process of rapid reorganization as new information has been assimilated. This mental representation that learners have of the language is known as their interlanguage, and it is the learner's personal, but flawed, version of the second language they are acquiring.
And it does not and cannot develop linearly. Course books assume the complete opposite. This brings me to the point of grammar, because grammar definitely has a place in the classroom. However, it should be taught reactively. This ensures that everything being taught is being taught with the learners in mind. You're not teaching them the present continuous because the book says we need to do the present continuous today. Instead, you're teaching them the present continuous because them knowing the present continuous is going to help them communicate an idea that they're trying and struggling to communicate effectively. But let me be very, very clear. I'm definitely not saying that teachers that use course books are bad teachers. They're absolutely not, and I've seen loads of fantastic teachers adapt course books in really creative ways and picking and choosing what they do. However, when teachers do that, then what is the course book? It's an activity bank. It's not a syllabus that is being followed rigidly. And I'm sure that all teachers watching this video will agree that the best lessons tend to just flourish out of nowhere, where students get distracted, the class moves away from what was prescribed, and suddenly authentic communication occurs. And finally, let me talk about myself for a second and this channel, because obviously this channel exists to prepare students for very specific exams. This is not a channel that is aiming to help you learn English. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to help you pass your exams. With this in mind, some course books exist solely to help learners pass their exams and feature a bunch of exercises that help them prepare for these exams. Are these a bad idea? Absolutely not. If you are preparing for an exam, then you should definitely be practicing the types of activities and exercises that are contained within the exam. However, you need to remember that what you're doing isn't English learning. You're not learning a language. Instead, you're preparing for an exam that's about a language. Seriously, we've all met them. Hundreds of weary-eyed language learners that know the present perfect continuous. They know what it is, and if I ask them to produce a present perfect continuous sentence, they can do it, but they can't speak English. They can't communicate in English, and that's because their focus, for often more than a decade, has been on explicit grammar rules. And that's not how language is learned. Because learning about a language and learning how to use a language are two very different things. And which one is more important to you? Oof, and there we have it. That is why, in my opinion, I think course books are no good for language learning. Does this mean I'm definitely 100% right? No, it doesn't mean that I'm definitely 100% right. And if you disagree with me, then please let me know your experience in the comments below, both if you're a teacher and if you're a learner. If you liked the video, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, leave a comment down below. My name is Toby, and this was Smash English.